Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. Thank you so much for joining us here today on the show. The story of the U.S. floating pier, where it was conducted, and why it has gone so badly. Also, we look at how Democrats are debating a Bibi blow-off. He is planning to come to Congress in short order, again, invited by both sides of House and Senate leadership. It really is a kind of an outrageous situation. Some of the most prominent Democrats, including some close to leadership, are planning on boycotting. We'll discuss briefly what they should do. Also, more efforts to draw this war to a close being rebuffed by Israel. The chief of defense, Benny Gantz, talking to Misha Rabi on Khan in Israel. Netanyahu blocked the hostage release deal for political reasons. That's in a new interview. He admitted it. And then, of course, we'll hear, this deal, it's only on Hamas. Also, we have a big news story from the Wall Street Journal about the complete failure of the United States war on the Houthis and how they have just gotten stronger. And again, I'm saying that, just completely with the straight face. We're doing serious news reporting on that. Also, we will end today with the Supreme Court rejecting the Trump-era ban on gun bump stocks. But first, ladies and gentlemen, we are starting tonight with Ukraine, where just yesterday Biden signed a 10-year security pact with Ukraine and promised, with EU help, a $50 billion loan. But will the money arrive in time to turn the tide, and will the deal outlast the election in November? President Biden has consistently resisted pressure during the 27 months of war to let Ukraine into NATO, convinced that it could quickly result in American troops being sent into direct combat with Russians, which, sounds about right. And by the way, if you think people want to die for Ukraine, you're out of your mind. Honestly, let's be real. Ukrainians at this point don't even want to die for Ukraine. There's a reason why all these Western European countries are deporting Ukrainians on the spot, because they all left, because understandably they don't want to fight in a war, on the front lines. So it's perfectly, and I'm not trying to, go out of there, call them cowards or attack them or anything like that, but, it is the reality. So on Thursday, Biden rolled out alternative steps designed to present President Putin of Russia, designed to demonstrate, really, that Putin of Russia, that the U.S. and his allies had no intention of just packing up and going home. He signed a 10-year security pact with Vladimir Zelensky, portrayed as guaranteeing a supply of weapons, intelligence support, device technology needed to win the war and deter a new one. So essentially here, we're not going to see any sort of troops or any sort of actual American, kind of boots on the ground commitment towards Ukraine, because that would be a much, much bigger issue. What this essentially seems to be is a kind of intention to support over the next 10 years that Biden is saying, we're going to support you in every way that we can over the next 10 years. This is our declared commitment to do that. So, in the diplomacy world, that is kind of a big deal. Just the declaration of, okay, we got your back. We're going to do this. So, it's just how it's going to be. And then they essentially, Zelensky, was obviously very happy about this, and really, but when you look to the point of it, essentially a $50 billion loan, quote unquote, they're not going to be paying any of that back, to rebuild devastated ports and power plants and to buy weapons. The money is to be repaid from interest generated from the $300 billion in assets that Putin inexplicably left in Western financial institutions before his 2020 invasion. Not a smart move there by Putin, so not really planning ahead. Our goal is to strengthen Ukraine's credible defense and deterrence capabilities for the long term, Biden said. Again, I think the big thing about this is and he did this, of course, at the G7 conference, but the key thing here about this is to what end? Like, what is it you're trying to do when you're trying to support the Ukrainians? Like, there has been no clear statement, and I can hear some of the Ukrainian people right now, because I've talked to them in the past, saying, it's very clear, we just want to take back all of Russian territory. Some people will say, including Crimea, and that's a fair goal, especially the pre-2022 territory, but I'm sorry, Biden has not been very upfront in saying that at all, because, like, he may have said it once or twice in a speech, some vague gesture to, we want to take back Russian territory, or, territory in Ukraine that's been taken over by Russia, and we want to, restore Ukraine to their full sovereignty. Like, that's perfectly understandable. And if so, say that, and also make a plan to get to just that, because being clear with your intentions, I think, is the best way to stop this war and stop it from going on and on and on. I think Putin, he has said he's ready to come to the table. He has been stopped. There's a note. He knows he can't take over Ukraine. But the sad thing is, with the lack of U.S. or just general military support and the lack of any sort of plan, the Russian army is, and also, by the way, the lack of any sort of manpower. If you see some of the people on the front lines, they're like 40. Like, they look like my great uncle. Just like my normal uncle. But he's like about 60 years old, 50 years old. Like, these are old people they got out there. Like, this is not a sustainable thing, no matter how much money that you give them, because the Russians are going to just keep coming and coming and coming. Like, they have taken a big hit from the sanctions, no doubt, but they have also become incredibly more self-reliant. And if there's one thing that country has, is a lot of resources and it's a lot of people. And they've had that kind of since the beginning of history. So they've been really able to utilize that to their defense. In a lot of these situations that have turned out to be very, very similar. And, they're not people that are just going to be able to, easily outlast. And again, I think it is Russia committed crime here, and they have committed multiple crimes in the course of carrying out the, overarching crime of the invasion of Ukraine. And I think if I had my, in a perfect world, I think Vladimir Putin should absolutely be right along The Hague, but he should be right along damn side Joe Biden, because he enabled the, situation that we're seeing in Israel. So again, the U.S. has very, very, I think the big thing we have to accept here is how little credibility the U.S. has, both as a kind of overarching voice of peace and, supporting of the international rules-based order, especially after the last 8 months. And they also, let's be honest here, they don't have the credibility to do everything they want to Russia via Ukraine. They just don't. They do not have the credibility to take back, and they don't have the military capacity to take back up to Crimea and take back Crimea that was, annexed by Russia in 2014. They just don't. So, they're going to want to keep doing it. They want to exercise their power. They want a place just to blow off weapons to. That's why it's going to keep going. But let's be real. This stuff, and we're talking about, we'll get to another story next, the U.S. military capacity and U.S. diplomatic capacity, the weight that we carry as an arbiter of peace, is rapidly decreasing. So that is something that we should really view in terms of this contract. It seems like a really serious 10-year security pact. But honestly, it's a little kind of thin when you take a closer look. We continue to find out more about the U.S. port in Gaza, and we will get to that next. So, yeah, this is really kind of a pretty crazy situation here. This is from Tariq Al-Hajjaj in Mondoweiss. The Trident, a U.S.-built floating pier off of Gaza's coast that is expected to deliver over 150 trucks worth of Gaza's humanitarian aid once fully operational, has been out of service for weeks. The port received damage to its infrastructure in unclear weather-related circumstances. Despite this, the floating pier appears to have served as a joint commercial center for both the Israeli and U.S. forces. It's essentially known at this point. We have seen videos, and the Israelis have kind of denied / not denied it, but the U.S. obviously is very keen to not have this be a very big deal. Despite this, the floating pier again appears to have served for this massacre, a pretty key command center for the Nusrat massacre on June 8th, which saw the retrieval of 4 Israeli captives. The damage that rendered the Trident unusable ostensibly resulted from heavy waves that affected parts of the port and 4 U.S. Navy ships, according to U.S. Central Command. On the ground, Palestinians believe the resistance groups have targeted U.S. ports with mortar shells, but no resistance faction in Gaza has claimed responsibility for any attack against the port. No other news has emerged to corroborate the speculation either. But one thing is becoming clearer. The Trident appears to be used to facilitate Israel's army invasion throughout Rafah. Francesca Albanese, the U.S. Special Rapporteur for Humanitarian Rights, said that Israel had perfidiously used aid trucks as cover during the Nusrat invasion, calling it humanitarian camouflage at another level. And I think that is a very, very fair thing. And that's something, again, they have admitted to doing for the Nusrat massacre / hostage rescue situation, where they came in aid trucks. Like, that is, I don't care if you're rescuing all the hostages at once. That is just something that nobody would ever do, because it is a blatant and obvious war crime. And even if somebody committed a war crime by taking the hostages in the first place, which Hamas did, it does not justify committing another war crime, and a pretty serious one at that, to massacre 270 civilians by doing so by coming out of an aid truck. An aid has already been enough of a killer, if you remember the flower massacre, for Palestinians this year. So that is definitely something to highlight there. The government media office in the Gaza Strip issued a press statement about the American port, which officially entered operation on May 17th before the weather rendered it unusable. The statement said that the U.S. administration was trying to beautify its ugly face and appear civilized by establishing a pier for the delivery of humanitarian aid. But, again, it seems like they were kind of right about that ugly face, if it really is true about the carrying out of this humanitarian or less than humanitarian, should we say, pretty far less than humanitarian goals. So the statement questioned the intention of the American administration, asserting the Trident does not come close to covering the needs of the Palestinian people for food in Gaza. It brings less than a truck, because you have to fill the trucks halfway when you drive them off the port, because the port isn't stable enough. It is really a joke. So during the ongoing genocidal war, the Israeli army destroyed entire cities. Over 80% of Gaza City has been leveled. Over other parts of northern Gaza and Khan Yunis were also heavily hit and continue to be. With 13,000 people missing in Gaza, still struck under the rubble, Palestinians say the floating port, which the Israeli army filled with the ruins of destroyed houses in the Gaza Strip, means humanitarian aid passes over a port drenched in blood. When Biden first announced the pier, the Israeli army began collecting the rubble of homes in the Gaza Strip and placing it in the port construction area, so the ruins would be a bridge for the arrival of American aid trucks. Think about that. Think about the symbolism of that and the disrespect for Palestinian people. It cannot be more clear. It just cannot be more clear. And it's again, what I really hate, another level than a pig-like Israeli Zionist. What I really hate is an American who, is also a Zionist, who is oh, well, we care about the Palestinians, but Hamas shouldn't have stopped. Just admit you think they're scum, that you can dump their houses. You can dump, the ruins of their houses on top of, the sea to make a bridge, to make an entryway bridge for more soldiers designed to kill the people en masse. Nothing, not a single solitary thing the Israeli government has done since October 7th represents any amount of respect for any of the Palestinian people, Hamas, Shamas, whatever. And I think this, this really shows it here. Meanwhile, we have Israel kind of continuing to gain more reaction, more respect here, at least on the U.S. side, but with this upcoming invitation to Congress, which I believe is on July 24th. And he said a lot of interesting stuff here going on. A pretty broad array of Democrats have said they are signaling they have no intentions of showing up for the speech. What they haven't quite agreed on is what, if anything, they will be doing instead. An incipient effort to organize semi-official alternative to Netanyahu's visit has been slow in coming together, lawmakers said. The latest sign of a continued divide with the Democratic Party on how to handle the politics surrounding Israel's war with Hamas. Those of us who don't want to be a prop for Benjamin Netanyahu have consensus. We agree that this is political, it's inappropriate, and we want this war to end, and we're not sure that Netanyahu does. And by the way, we have seen this come out Benny Gantz's comments on an interview. I can't play the sound unless it's in Hebrew. We can listen to that, but this is pretty well reported by Khan News, which is the NPR of Israel, that Benny Gantz, who was in the war cabinet, came out and said that hostage deals were blocked by Netanyahu for political reasons. So, there's something to be pretty clear about. It's not, it's not something to be, oh, I'm not sure, and then he wants to, he doesn't want to end the war. It's clear. Beyond that, you start to get into some disagreement. So the counter-programming gets into some of those fault lines, because you got, Jared Huffman, who's been pretty, let's just say a pretty strong liberal Zionist on the Democratic side. And you got Jim Clyburn, who's also said he's planning to skip. which is honestly kind of smart for the again, which shows the amount of kind of right-wing Democrats out there shows you how stupid it was for the Democrats to sign on to this invite in the first place. It's just humiliating. They're asking themselves to get embarrassed. Like, it's just going to happen no matter what. Because, let's be real. What do you think they're going to do the moment they get up there? Or Netanyahu is going to do the moment he gets up there? It's essentially make an endorsement speech for Trump, just the same way he made, whenever he came in 2015, he essentially set the stage for Trump by really taking the hammer to Barack Obama in a very, very public space, which was the honor of, I guess some people call it an honor, of speaking to a joint session of the U.S. Congress. Like, it's a big sign of endorsement for the U.S. government that was signed off by both parties. And it was really just a stupid political decision for them, not to mention a, complete and utter, if we needed any more reminder of how BS the U.S. talk of, international rules-based order. Again, we're inviting someone with an arrest warrant out for him at The Hague to our country to speak in front of our Congress. Like, that is just another embarrassment on top of embarrassment. And you got people who care about that. You got people like Clyburn who care about the political optics. I guess it's smart for them in their sense. He said, I will not be attending. He said there may be some folks who want to have alternate meetings on this, but he is not sure about that. He said, AOC said they're still figuring out an approach. I'm certainly going to be part of the contingent of members that will be either boycotting or responding in some way. I think that, frankly, his presence and his potential address in Congress at this time is one of the darkest days I have seen here. That is the right rhetoric, I think, for AOC there to be using, so credit to her on that. Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she was non-committal on whether she would attend. Dick Durbin, who's a Senate Majority Whip, which is pretty significant given that Chuck Schumer signed the letter inviting him here, told us this week that he has not made up his mind on whether he will attend. Asked what factors he's considering, Durbin replied, the totality of circumstances. Okay, buddy. Yeah, so we'll see when it's time to put up or shut up. Warren, Merkley, and Bernie Sanders are also not planning on going. Sanders loudly denounced the visit. Hakeem Jeffries, who signed the letter inviting Netanyahu to speak, said, as is the case with respect to any joint address, every individual member will be able to make a decision as to whether they'll participate or not participate. So it's going to be a pretty mainstream position. When you got Jim Clyburn doing it, essentially means it is pretty safe to do. But it is the absolute least they can do. They should be throwing eggs at him as he walks in the door. Like, this is an absolute embarrassment to the country. Ladies and gentlemen, America just took a pretty big L. We talked about how the United States has pretty limited capacity to help Ukraine. And a big reason why I think that is because of this article that's come out in Yemen, or about Yemen, in Yemen's Houthis in the Wall Street Journal. Aboard the USS Laboon, it was just after 9 p.m. when radar operators aboard this U.S. Navy destroyer in the Red Sea spotted a tiny arrow on their screens, a missile hurtling toward them 5 times the speed of sound. The crew of the warship with 300 sailors aboard had just seconds to shoot it down. As the projectile closed in, the Laboon launched an interceptor from silos beneath its deck, destroying an incoming missile in flight. The January 9th attack came amid one of the largest maritime battles the U.S. has faced since World War II. Houthi rebels in Yemen that day launched 18 drones and missile cruisers along with a ballistic missile at the Laboon and 3 other American destroyers, a U.S. aircraft, and a British warship that in an attack that unfolded over a dozen hours. Let me just say, it is so perfect that the British have been the only people to have a ship, I think, actually sunk by them. But, again, just shows you what type of country they are. But since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, Iran-backed Houthis have lobbed missiles, drones, and other weapons at commercial vessels and warships nearly every day. Although most of the weapons have been shot down, at least 77 cargo ships have been hit, and one British-owned ship carrying 20,000 tons of fertilizer aboard was sunk. Though largely ineffective, the Houthi attacks have been able to disrupt shipping and keep the U.S. and its allies tied down. And I think, that means they were pretty effective. I think that's what they were trying to do there, Wall Street Journal. The attacks are the direct result of fateful geography, and also, by the way, the fact that the U.S. has lost the war against the Houthis for the past 8 years in Saudi Arabia by essentially helping Saudi Arabia commit a genocide against them, and the Houthis have been fighting back against that genocide and have thus turn the tide pretty effectively. And before Gaza, Yemen was the worst, the poorest country, the worst humanitarian crisis through the Saudi blockade. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, essentially where they attack, it's a really critical coast connecting all of Asia to all of Europe, going through the Red Sea. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, you get the attacks really coming in pretty hard and pretty intensely. They essentially control the part of Yemen. The Houthis do that. 70% of the population do. They have had millions in the streets in Sana'a, which is the capital there for Palestine, since day one. They are just a deeply, deeply pro-Palestinian society, and the Houthis have been taking advantage of that to the U.S. detriment. No warships are known to have been hit in the 80 attempted attacks, but there have been some close calls, underscoring the perils for the U.S. and allies that have sent ships to the area the longer the conflict continues. Biden administration has limited its military response to the Houthi attacks, hoping to avoid being drawn into a wider Middle Eastern conflict, but that has meant the flotilla of U.S. allied warships has spent weeks and even months patrolling the Red Sea on alert, and the attacks have kept coming. We haven't taken a hit, but strategically, we haven't restored the flow of goods, which is what they care about. The Houthis. They're not trying to sink U.S. ships. More than 2,000 commercial ships, or 20,000, pass through the Red Sea in a typical year, including 150 tankers and container ships, but ships traffic has steeply dropped off since the attacks began. Not a surprise. Get this, 67% decline in tanker traffic has dropped by 50%. The 67% number was for container ships, according to Windward, a maritime intelligence company. The Houthis have focused attention on Israeli-owned vessels headed for the port of Eilat, which have seen the ship it's looking a little bit light in Israeli ports recently. It's because nobody wants to come through there, and that's who they have been targeting in a very sensible way to take a hit to the Israeli economy, but it also has taken a hit to the world economy and the U.S. economy, which is really the engine behind this whole thing. If you think about it. Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, said in congressional testimony last month, the U.S.-led effort has been insufficient to deter the militant group's targeting of ships, and the threat will remain active for some time. Earlier this year, the Laboon was patrolling in calm waters underneath the clear sky, north of Bab el-Mandeb. On the bridge, radar monitors show cargo ships making their way north, none of them under attack. The morning, 4 one-way attack drones targeted a different U.S. warship, the first such attack after a 3-day lull. During the January 9th attack, the Laboon crew saw the first 2 missiles heading toward the ship and shot them down. The cruise missiles lumbered along at subsonic speed, allowing them relatively ample time to respond. Then came the ballistic missile. These things are telephone pole size. You get 3 minutes of flight time, you detect it for 45 seconds, and you get 10 seconds to determine whether you're going to shoot at it or not, said the captain of the ship. The Laboon uses several weapon systems, blah, 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 blah. We did our damnedest to make sure that we were ready for a ballistic missile, but we weren't really expecting it, said Commander Bloomberg. In addition, which is the commanding officer of the ship, in addition to shooting down incoming missiles and drones, the U.S. and other countries have carried out several waves of airstrikes against launchers, radar installations, and facilities used by the Houthis in the attacks. But it has not been very effective. They spent about $1 billion in munitions. And by the way, these rockets are a lot cheaper, the ones that the Houthis are sending over, than the stuff the Navy has. And U.S. officials worry that the conflict is simply not sustainable for the U.S. defense industrial base, already having supplies strained and demands increased for weaponry by Ukraine and Israel. The supply of weapons from Iran is cheap and highly sustainable. Ours is expensive. Our supply chains are crunched, and our logistic tails are long, said Emily Harding. We are playing whack-a-mole, and they are playing the long game. As that kind of apocryphal Taliban quote, they have all the watches, but we have all the time. That comes very, very true there. And all I have to say about that to the U.S. Navy is, go cry harder. It really is that kind of reaction, because, again, there's a very simple way to stop this: restore global traffic, to defend Operation Prosperity Guardian, which is force a ceasefire and a just solution for the Palestinians in Gaza. And, the Houthis were going to continue to do what they do on that, no matter what. All right, to close the show today, we have a big new report from Washington. The Supreme Court struck down a ban on bump stocks, which enables semi-automatic rifles to fire at speeds rivaling those of machine guns, erasing one of the government's rare firearm regulations to result from a mass shooting, which is the worst mass shooting, by the way, in American history, which is like 500 people killed, I believe, in Las Vegas. The decision by a vote of 6-3, split along ideological lines, again, just absolutely just really deadening stuff, said that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives had exceeded its power when it prohibited the device by issuing which is a bump stock, by issuing a rule that classified bump stocks as machine guns, which is essentially, what they did, because the bump stock is, the whole purpose of it is to turn a semi-automatic gun into a machine gun, because it cannot, we hold that a semi-automatic rifle equipped with a bump stock is not a machine gun because it cannot fire more than one shot by a single function of the trigger. Justice Thomas wrote, his opinion included several diagrams of the firing mechanism, and he described in technical detail the internal workings of a firearm to show how a bump stock works. The Trump administration enacted the ban after a gunman opened fire at the Las Vegas concert in 2017, one of the deadliest massacres in modern American history. The decision was a forceful rejection of one of the government's few steps to address gun violence, particularly as legislative efforts have stalled in Congress. And the narrowly written decision was not a Second Amendment challenge. Rather, it was yet another effort to attack the administrative authority of the government. Sotomayor summarized her dissent from the bench, a practice reserved for profound disagreements, and the first such announcement of the term. This majority puts machine guns back in civilian hands. Sotomayor says, when I see a bird that walks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, I call that bird a duck. Sotomayor wrote, and I believe so would the dead and injured people in the Las Vegas shooting. They would probably agree with Sotomayor on that, and their families. A bump stock equipped with semi-automatic rifles fires automatically more than one shot without manual reloading by a single function of the trigger, she says, because I, like Congress, call that a machine gun. I respectfully dissent. Well, she does respectfully. You can't argue with that. It's just like, it's so depressing. It's just like, it's beyond the parody. It's like, I think Americans just do not realize how much of an international embarrassment we are. Everyone, even the people who are like, oh, we have good things to say about Americans, but it's like, I would really feel uncomfortable there because of the gun situation. People don't realize how insane it is, where we had 500 people gunned down at a country concert. And that was, the first one after a string of horrific mass shootings. We just passed the San Diego anniversary very, very recently. And we didn't do anything after that. And it took 500 people to be shot down by this, machine gun, essentially, with the bump stock. And then even the Trump administration was like, okay, we got to do something about this. And that's the first time after we've had corpses on corpses on corpses piled up because of the mass shooting and the mass proliferation of guns in this country that nothing has been done about, including kindergartners in school. And, the Supreme Court, the unelected, lifetime term Supreme Court that has been stacked with a conservative majority, takes away literally only the one piece of gun legislation that we've ever literally had. And it's not even from a Second Amendment challenge, and it is something that is completely against the will of the people. We have an unelected body that is spreading the proliferation of machine guns around this country, even as they kill everyday people en masse. They don't care. And it's not even for a Second Amendment reason. It's all part of a cynical project by people like Thomas, Alito, all these other people who want to derail and chip away at the power of the federal government. They want to chip away the power of the federal government to keep people safe, to maintain order on the side, because then all their friends, the people that literally pay for their vacations, they can do everything they want down the road. And if you just happen to have access to machine guns while you're at it, that's fine. Go ahead. Literally knock yourself out. Shoot yourself. Shoot each other. It means more of the environment for us to destroy, more of your money for us to take. This is what it is all about. This is what the conservative project leads to. It all ties together. It's like taking away this rule for the ATF, then you're taking away this rule for the EPA, this one for the SEC, and all these organizations. This is what this ideology is about. It's about complete chaos. It is about no sense of safety, no sense of justice, no sense of basic control on our lives, so that we can't even get bump stocks that were taken away by the Trump administration, we can't even get them consistently, banned over a long period of time. Like, it is absolutely absurd. And again, it is something that is completely against the will of the people. It's like probably most Republicans are just like, what the heck? And it's like, it's not, again, I think the most interesting part of this is it's not even on Second Amendment grounds. It's on authority of the government grounds. Like, the government has no power to do this, is what they're contending. So, again, that just sets the stage for more and more really, horrific things down to come. Like, it is such really, again, dark day after dark day, but a really deeply dark day, an embarrassing day to live in this country. And hopefully another thing, even though it's kind of flying under the radar, that makes, even one American more aware of how deeply and fundamentally poisonous the Supreme Court is to our country. All right, we're back Monday. It's Newsflash.